All right, ladies and gentlemen, settle in, get comfortable, because tonight I've got a story for you. And trust me, this one didn't come from a writer's room. No, this happened live, which, as anyone in television will tell you, is just a fancy way of saying anything can go wrong, and usually does. So picture this. It's April 15th, 1982. A nice, normal Thursday night. The kind of night where everything is running smoother than my golf swing. Well, smoother than most of my golf swings. We're doing the Tonight Show. Everything's humming along beautifully. The band sounds great. The audience is lively. And sitting across from me is none other than Tony Curtis. Now there's a guy, Hollywood royalty. I mean, some like it hot, Spartacus. This man worked with legends. Marilyn Monroe, Jack Lemmon. He had stories for days. And not the kind you skip through either. These were good ones. Tony's in top form, charming, funny, just owning the stage. He's telling a story about Billy Wilder, waving his hands around, really painting the picture. The audience is laughing, I'm laughing. It's one of those interviews where you don't even have to work hard. You just sit back and enjoy the ride. And then, 8 minutes in, something changes. Now, when you've been doing live television as long as I have, you develop a kind of radar. You notice things, little shifts, tiny moments where something feels off. Tony's talking mid-sentence, and suddenly he just stops. Not a dramatic pause, not a comedic beat, just stops. His face, the color drains right out of it. I mean, 1 second he's glowing under the lights, the next he looks like he just saw my monologue notes. So I lean forward a bit and I say, "Tony, you okay?" Now normally, Tony Curtis, quick as a whip, he'd fire something right back. But this time, nothing. He doesn't answer right away. His hand slowly moves up to his chest, and he blinks a few times like he's trying to focus. The audience? They're still with us, but they think it's part of the act. You know how it is. People assume, oh, this must be one of those bits. We've done stranger things on the show. Then he tries to speak. He says, but his voice, it's not the same. It's strained, confused, like the words are getting lost on the way out. "Johnny, I don't feel..." And before he can finish, he collapses, right there in the chair. Now let me tell you something about live television. When something like that happens, time does a funny thing. Everything slows down and speeds up at the same time. It feels like an eternity. But you've really only got a second to act. Cameras are still rolling. 20 million people are watching. And right in front of me is a friend, a guest, a man who just dropped unconscious on national television. Now, most people in that situation, they freeze, or panic, or they look around hoping someone else knows what to do. But there wasn't time for that. So I stood up immediately and moved to Tony, and I said, loud enough for everyone in that studio to hear, "We need a doctor. Is there a doctor in the audience?" You've heard that line before, right? Usually in movies, not so funny when it's real. But here's the thing. I didn't wait for someone to raise their hand. I got down beside him, eased him out of the chair, and laid him flat on his back right there on the stage. Now the audience, they knew. This wasn't part of the show anymore. The laughter, gone. You could hear a pin drop. I leaned in close and said, "Tony, can you hear me?" Nothing. His eyes were half open, but there was no response. So I checked his breathing, put my ear near his mouth, watched his chest. He was breathing, but shallow, not good. And at that moment, all those things you hope you'll never need to remember suddenly matter. I loosened his tie, opened up his collar, gave him room to breathe. Then I lifted his legs up onto the chair, kept the blood flowing where it needed to go. And all of this happening in seconds. I turned and said, "Call 911 now." Our stage manager, already moving. Good man. Ed McMahon comes over. God bless Ed, always ready, and I tell him, "Ed, get the audience back, give us some space, because now this isn't a show anymore, this is a situation." And here's the part that still amazes people. I turned back toward the camera. Yeah, the same camera that had been capturing jokes just minutes before. And I said, calmly, because panic doesn't help anyone, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a medical emergency. Help is on the way. Tony is breathing, and we're taking care of him. We're going to take a short break. No drama, no theatrics, just the truth." And just like that, we go to commercial. Now behind the scenes, not so commercial. Those cameras kept rolling. Everything we were doing, every move, every decision, was being recorded. And within about 3 minutes, though I swear it felt like 30, paramedics rushed in. They took over, got Tony stabilized, and transported him to the hospital. Later on, we find out it was a heart attack, a minor one, but make no mistake, it could have been a whole lot worse. Doctors said if things hadn't been handled exactly the way they were, we might have lost him. Right there, on live television. Now think about that for a second. Not a script, not a rehearsal, real life. And folks, that's the part they don't tell you about show business. Sometimes the most important moment isn't the joke you land. It's what you do when the joke stops. All right, so where were we? Ah, yes, commercial break. The shortest break of my life, by the way. I've had longer coffee sips. Now behind the curtain, things are moving fast. Paramedics are in, wires, oxygen, the whole scene. You suddenly realize this stage isn't just for punchlines anymore. And Tony, well, Tony's being taken care of, but nobody really knows just how serious it is yet. They get him out, rush him to the hospital, Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, and for a moment, the studio just sits there, quiet. You could feel it. That kind of silence that doesn't belong in a place built for laughter. Now, later that night and into the next day, we start hearing from the doctors. And one of them, a cardiologist named Dr. Michael Richardson, holds a press conference. And this is where it gets real. He says Tony Curtis is stable. He's going to recover. Great news, right? Everybody breathes again. But then he adds something that stuck with me. He says, I want to make this very clear. If Johnny Carson hadn't done exactly what he did, keeping the airway clear, elevating the legs, calling for help immediately, we might be having a very different conversation today. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not the kind of review you expect after a show. Usually it's, hey, good monologue. Maybe tighten up the second joke. Not, you saved a man's life. And the truth is, I wasn't thinking about being heroic. I wasn't thinking about headlines. I was thinking, don't let this man slip away on my watch. Because here's something people don't always know. After my time in the United States Navy, I kept up with first aid training, quietly. No big announcements, no flashing signs, just something I figured might come in handy someday. Did I think that someday would be in front of 20 million people? No. I figured maybe a golf course and maybe a bad shrimp cocktail. But life has a sense of humor, and not always the good kind. Now fast forward, 3 weeks later, we're back on the show. Same stage, same desk, same audience energy. But this time, there's something different in the air. Because Tony Curtis is coming back. And let me tell you, when he walks out, that audience didn't just applaud, they exploded. I mean, people were on their feet. It was one of those moments where you realize you're not just watching television. You're part of something bigger. Tony walks over, we hug, and for a second, neither of us says anything. Not because we don't have lines, because we don't need them. Finally, Tony sits down, looks at me, and says, you know, Johnny, I've done a lot of dangerous things in movies. Fought gladiators, hung off buildings, all that stuff. And I'm thinking, yeah, and probably got paid better for it than I did. He continues, but the scariest moment of my life was waking up in a hospital and being told I collapsed on your show. Now that'll wake you up faster than coffee. So I say to him, well, the scary part for me was watching you go down and realizing we might lose you right there. And I told him the truth. I'm just glad I remembered those Navy first aid courses. Now, Tony, he shakes his head, and he says something I didn't expect. The doctors told me what you did wasn't just basic first aid. You made decisions in seconds that required real understanding. He starts listing it off. You elevated my legs. That kept blood going to my brain. You loosened my collar. That helped me breathe. Every single thing you did was exactly right. Now at this point I'm thinking, can we get back to jokes? I'm much better at those. But the moment, it mattered. Because what people saw that night wasn't just a talk show. It was preparation meeting opportunity. And here's the part that surprised a lot of folks. I had kept my emergency training updated, year after year, quietly. No applause, no spotlight, just in case. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I always thought, If something goes wrong on this show, I better be ready. Well, something went wrong, and we were ready. Now what happened next? That's where the story gets even bigger. Because this didn't just end with Tony recovering. No. This had ripple effects. NBC, our network, took a long look at what happened and said, all right, we need to be better prepared. So they upgraded their emergency protocols, made sure medical personnel were always nearby during live broadcasts. And other networks, they followed. Because nothing motivates change faster than seeing how close things can come to going very wrong. Training programs, first aid, emergency response, they started using footage from that night. Yeah, imagine that. Somewhere out there, people are learning life-saving skills, watching a talk show host kneeling on a stage trying to keep his guest breathing. And then the American Red Cross reaches out to me. They say, Johnny, would you be willing to appear in public service announcements, encourage people to learn first aid? And I said, sure. Because if one scary night on television can convince even one person to learn how to help somebody else, and then maybe something good came out of it. Because here's the truth, folks. Emergencies don't send invitations. They don't check your schedule. They don't wait until the cameras are off. They just happen. And when they do, you've got about 90 seconds to decide what kind of person you're going to be. All right. So now we've got Tony back on his feet. The audience is cheering, and the network's rethinking everything. And somewhere out there, people are learning first aid because of what happened on a late-night talk show. Not exactly the legacy I had in mind when I started, by the way. I thought maybe a few good jokes, a couple of decent interviews. Not, hey, Johnny, thanks for the life-saving demonstration. But the story doesn't stop there. Oh, no. Tony Curtis made sure of that. From that point on, he never missed a chance, never to bring it up. Interviews, public appearances, conversations. If there was a microphone nearby, sooner or later he'd say, you know, Johnny Carson saved my life. Now that's a tough act to follow. What am I supposed to say? Stick around, folks, I'll also juggle. Years later, Tony even wrote about it in his autobiography, devoted an entire chapter to that night. And he didn't just talk about what happened. He talked about what it meant. He wrote that I could have panicked, could have waited, could have let someone else step in. Instead, I acted. And because of that, he was still here. Now that kind of thing, it changes a person. Tony didn't just go back to making movies and telling stories. No, he made some real changes, quit smoking, cleaned up his diet, started exercising, became an advocate for heart health. I mean, the man turned his second chance into a full-time job, and he got time, a lot of time, another 28 years. 28, that's birthdays, holidays, family dinners, moments you don't think about until you almost lose them. Tony Curtis lived all the way to 2010, passed away peacefully at 85. And in one of his last interviews, he said something that, well, it stays with you. He said, Johnny gave me those years. Every birthday, every holiday, every moment with my family. I got all of that because he knew what to do. Now, let me tell you something. That's not the kind of credit you get used to. You can spend 30 years on television, 30 years, making people laugh night after night. But sometimes, the most important thing you ever do happens in about 90 seconds, and it's not funny. That night, it showed people something they didn't usually see. Sure, they knew me as the guy behind the desk, the jokes, the timing, the raised eyebrow, that whole routine. But this was different. This was about being ready, being prepared for something you hope never happens. Because here's the thing. Life doesn't care if the cameras are rolling. It doesn't wait for the cue card. It doesn't say, hold on, we'll do this after the commercial break. It just happens. And when it does, you either know what to do or you don't. Now, over the years, people would ask me, Johnny, what was the scariest moment you ever had on The Tonight Show? They expect some funny story, right? Maybe a joke that bombed, a guest that went off the rails. But I always said the same thing, that night, the night Tony Curtis went down. Because people tune in to laugh. They want entertainment. They don't expect to see their host dealing with something like that. But that's the job too, handling whatever comes through that curtain, even when it's not part of the script. And you know what's interesting? Even today, years later, emergency response trainers still use that footage. Yeah, somewhere out there, someone's sitting in a class watching a black and white clip of a talk show host, trying to keep his guest alive. and learning from it, because it proves something important. Knowing what to do in an emergency, that's not just for doctors. That's not just for paramedics. That's for everybody. Anybody can learn it. Everybody should learn it, because you never know when you're going to be the one standing there with no script, no rehearsal, no second take, just you and a moment that matters. So, yeah, over the years, I've entertained millions of people, thousands of shows, countless guests, more jokes than I can remember, and a few I wish everyone else would forget. But if you ask me, those 90 seconds, that might have been the most important performance I ever gave. Not because it got laughs, not because it got ratings, but because it was real, it worked, and it saved a life. Now, before we wrap up here tonight, let me just say this. If hearing this story does one thing, just one thing, I hope it makes you think about being prepared. Take a first aid course, learn what to do, because someday, somewhere, somebody might need you. And when that moment comes, you won't have time to think about it. You'll just have to act. And who knows? You might end up doing something a whole lot more important than telling a joke on television. Good night, folks.